Hi, this is Cory Parnell. I'm just going to give it just one more minute. Watching the people logging in. So do appreciate everyone joining, and we'll wait just one more minute. Okay, let's jump into it. My name is Cory Parnell. I'm a principal at BGM and a longtime partner of the Marijuana Policy Project, the group. Just real quick, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with this organization. It's a U.S. dedicated to legalizing cannabis throughout the U.S. They've helped pass 15 medical cannabis laws and played a leading role in 14 of the 24 legalization states. No organization in the movement has changed as many cannabis laws, impacted as many patients and consumers, or created as many new markets or done more for the cannabis industry than MPP. And I'm excited. We try to do various webinars with our partners. MPP is a great one, and with constant change within this industry. On our panel today, we have three members from the MPP. The first one is Executive Director Adam Smith, brings broad base experience throughout this industry. Then we have Karen O'Keefe, who is the Director of State Policies. And then lastly, we've got Kevin Caldwell, who's the Southeast Legislative Manager. So I'm going to kick it off with you, Adam. Maybe just a high level overview of what's going on at the federal level.
Hello. Thanks so much, Cory, for having us. It's always a pleasure to join BMG and do these webinars. So before I get into what's going on at the federal level, I want to give a little overview of where we are in the broadest policy sense. Recent polls have shown majority support remains for legalizing cannabis for adult use. Those numbers are higher with Democrats and independents than with Republicans, who are hovering right around 50%. Independents and Democrats are well above 50%. Democrats are close to 80%. Nationally, total cannabis arrests since we started legalizing in 1996, the year that California became the first state to end prohibition in any way by passing a medical initiative. We were arresting almost 900,000 people a year in this country, close to 90% of those for possession alone. Today, we are down to just over 200,000 arrests. We are still the vast majority of those are for possession. Still, the vast majority of those are for people under 25, and still, those arrested are disproportionately people of color by several orders of magnitude. The reduction in arrests has been driven primarily by legal states that have seen arrests go down by an average of about 90%. And if it weren't for Illinois, and I think Karen has one other state that is still arresting folks at an obscenely high level, that 90% number would even be higher. And the numbers in the legal states of folks that are still being arrested skew toward people under 21, which is problematic from our perspective. We don't think that, if adults should not be arrested for cannabis, we think young people should not be arrested for cannabis. There are ways to deal, certainly, with those under 18, can be remanded to the custody of their parents, things like that. But we are still addicted to arresting people in this country, and so that has been part of the fight that we've been involved in for 30 years. Let me touch on also youth use, which I think is really important, because for 30 years we have heard that legalization is going to addict our children and we have to protect the kids. The truth is that now that more than half the country lives in adult use legal states, teen use, which is defined as 8th to 12th graders, is at its lowest level or right near its lowest level since the Centers for Disease Control started asking the question in 1975. Um, it has been cut almost in half in some of the age groups, and youth access has specifically gone down. In 1996, nearly 90% of 12th graders said cannabis was easy or fairly easy to obtain. Over 80% of 10th graders said it was easy to obtain, and nearly 55% of 8th graders said it was easy to obtain. Those numbers today are 25% of 8th graders, 41% of 10th graders, so cut in half in both those cases, and 65% of 12th graders, which is a 35% reduction. And that just proves the point that if we put this behind counters where IDs are checked every time and we move the market into licensed hands, fewer people sell it illegally, there are fewer access points for kids. And so as we go forward and we're seeing more and more pushback, it's important to know that this idea that we are somehow endangering kids by regulating this market is actually the opposite of the truth. In terms of federal policy, we are unlikely to see further moves from the federal government under this Congress for sure. There is a chance that if control of the chambers changes after this election, we will see movement on this issue. Unclear whether whether President Trump would sign a legalization bill, but we're in strange political times, and we don't know. Banking has been something that the industry has been pushing for and spent millions and millions of dollars lobbying for quite a number of years. We are still not there, so the federal government is still treating this as if it is fully prohibited around the country. Let's see, and in hemp, last year, as probably everyone knows, Congress passed legislation that basically banned all hemp-derived products that contain more than trace amounts of THC. That ban goes into effect this November. There is a lot of work being done to either delay that ban, which we think is unlikely, to replace that ban with a regulatory system. I think Representative Barr is about to introduce a bill that would do that. We also don't see that happening. There may be some. We feel like there may be some. We're going to talk about hemp, but there may be some fiddling around the edges with THC limits, and maybe for beverages, but that is to be seen. What else? I think that's a pretty good overview to get us started on where we are. Oh, we are seeing pushback. I know you asked me federally, but we're seeing pushback in states that has grown and become better funded to limit rights in states where there is legal adult use cannabis. And in Massachusetts, there's going to be a ballot initiative that would end adult use cannabis sales. We don't expect that to pass. I am involved in the ballot committee to defeat that, and it is important to note that since Massachusetts legalized adult use sales 10 years ago, their teen use is down 25%, and that will be a big issue in this campaign. But it's important that be defeated so that we don't see those pop up all over the country.
Yep. A couple things. One is we do like this to be an interactive webinar. So if you do have questions, please throw them in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them as we're going through the webinar. What are the key aspects of the federal hemp legislation passed in November of 2025 and what's the real impetus for Congress enacting these significant restrictions on the hemp-derived products? Adam?
Okay, I was going to try to toss that to Karen, but I will take
Karen?
that. Karen, you want to take that?
I can start on it and you can add if you want to. So,
There we go.
as part of the reopening of the government after the 43-day shutdown, there was a big omnibus spending bill, and included in it, mostly driven by Mitch McConnell, thinking that the hemp industry had gotten out of control with intoxicating hemp and with what we're seeing as some bad actors. There have been some bad actors, there have been sales to children, there are some products that have flashy packaging that looks like Starburst or other things that the consumer might not even know has THC in them. So Mitch McConnell and some other members of Congress pushed hard to close the loophole, but instead of replacing the kind of regulatory void that has existed since 2018, since these hemp-derived products were illegal, with something that was a sensible regulatory structure with age gating, they instead completely banned most hemp products effective exactly 1 year later. So starting on November 12th, 2026, instead of having what was a 0.3% of THC by dry weight basis cap on THC, what will be in effect is a zero point 0.4 milligrams limit in a total container. And that's of all THC, not just Delta 9, along with any other cannabinoids that have similar effects as THC on humans and animals, which is not a great definition because THC, of course, has some very positive effects that other cannabinoids might have too, like that are not intoxicating, which is what Congress was trying to get at. So it's not clear yet what will be considered these similar cannabinoids. 0.4 milligrams of THC is a very small amount. It's such a small amount that there are a lot of products that aren't even intoxicating, topicals, full spectrum CBD products that will have vastly more than 0.4 milligrams per container. The bill also changes, it essentially bans synthetic cannabinoids as well. So there were a bunch of cannabinoids that were being produced that have similar or more intoxicating effects than Delta 9 THC that had not existed in nature. And you could extract CBD from cannabis and then have chemists change it into these new cannabinoids that were intoxicating. So those would be banned under this hemp bill as well. So it would prohibit the vast majority of the hemp industry, including a lot of CBD products that have modest amounts of THC. And it was in a pretty large part driven by, some members of Congress that thought that this had gotten out of control, and some states thought so as well. But instead of being a targeted approach, like I said, it was way broader. Adam, do you want to add to that at all?
I would say that that while it's a complicated issue. Starting with the synthetics, we think it's actually not a bad thing to ban these synthetics. Nobody really knows what the impact is on consuming these molecules. They don't appear in nature. Just because you can convert them from stuff you can extract from the hemp plant doesn't necessarily make them safe. And we think that, or at least I believe, that the hemp industry, as it stood totally unregulated, was not something that was an unalloyed good, right? I mean that we shouldn't be putting stuff out into the world that we don't know what the health effects are. And separating that out from naturally derived cannabinoids was very important. It's also important that we're not selling unregulated products for human consumption at all, right? I mean, we had gummies at gas stations and that sort of thing, and nobody knew what they were taking, necessarily the dosage, and they weren't always age gated, and so that definitely needed to be dealt with. But this really points to the fact that what we need is, overall rational cannabinoid policy, and not necessarily split up by, was the original plant material, have more THC or less THC. It's really about the products that are being offered for sale to the public, and hopefully we will eventually get to the point where we can put all of this under one umbrella and have, broad cannabinoid policy that keeps people safe but allows people access to cannabinoids. That's what I would add.
Maybe Adam, Adam or Karen, you guys kind of touched on this, but one of the listeners said they're confused the difference between Delta 8, Delta 9, THC, and the implications for legality seems convoluted.
Yeah, it is convoluted. So in the naturally occurring cannabis plant, Delta 9 THC is what we normally think of, most people would think of as THC, the layperson. Delta 8 exists in nature, but in a very much smaller quantity. And because initially the hemp ban only applied, under existing law to Delta 9 THC, and because people wanted to purchase these products. You have a bunch of states where cannabis isn't legal, and this allowed for access to something that was very similar to cannabis. People started creating these kind of chemical synthetics, so converting CBD to Delta 8. So under what will go into effect in November, if the law does not change, that 0.4 milligram cap will include both Delta 8 and Delta 9 THC. And let me just read how it's worded. It also bans hemp-derived products with cannabinoids that are not capable of being naturally produced by the cannabis plant. So that part would be things like THC. I think there's a bunch of novel cannabinoids that aren't actually in the plant that are being synthesized. And then the next point of it is it also bans cannabinoids that were synthesized or manufactured outside of the plant. So those are the two pieces that, if it isn't changed, would be banned.
I would point out that these synthetics and even products containing Delta 8 likely would not exist but for prohibition. Right. I mean, their very existence is a workaround to confusing, untenable, and incomplete federal policy. Right. And so a lot of these problems that we're now trying to solve through this are problems that are created entirely by the fact that naturally occurring cannabinoids are illegal or in many states or regulated, and they got this loophole through hemp. And so this stuff came out on the market, which basically did not exist in consumer products up until 2018.
Yeah, I'll add to that. You think about, so hemp has to be 0.3% THC or less. Cannabis plants can be, maybe up to 25 or 30% THC. So you have 1/100th at most of the THC in a hemp plant. It doesn't really make any sense for federal law to say you can have THC products if the plant started out as being 0.3% THC. So ideally, to have sensible policy, it would just be, it can be derived from any plant, and you just regulate that end product. And then you wouldn't have seen this production of these novel cannabinoids that could be much more risky and that haven't been used for millennium like Delta 9 THC has.
Right. The one thing I would clarify on that, and that's all correct, is just because you start with a plant that is 0.3% THC as plant material does not mean you cannot create extract that's 100% THC, right? And so regulating the plant material when it has nothing to do with the cannabinoid content or the THC content of the final product that's going to go to consumers is a misunderstanding of how all this works, and which is typical of the federal government at this point in cannabis.
If the federal hemp ban goes into effect on November 12th, what do you guys think will be the immediate impact on companies operating in the hemp industry and their customers? What do
Kevin,
you
you want to
see?
take that? You're in most of the hemp states.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that for me?
I was going
Sure.
to throw that to you since most of those states are your states. What's going to happen to the hemp industry?
So, if the ban goes into effect on November 12th, those products will be considered marijuana. They will become illegal, and in some of those states with some very harsh penalties. One of the things that we have seen since the consumable hemp market has developed like it has over the last 7 years is we've seen a reduction in cannabis arrests in these prohibition states because in many of them, North Carolina, Texas, Florida, that were real traditionally had very high arrest rates, were those number of arrests went down because a lot of consumers were purchasing hemp flower, or the crime labs did not have the bandwidth to properly test the difference between a hemp flower and traditional cannabis marijuana flower. So, I think we're going to see a huge drop in both tax revenue and access for consumers. And sadly, I think that we are going to see a very large increase in the number of Americans arrested for possession again. So sadly, that turnaround from what Adam had highlighted earlier in the webinar on how arrests have been dropping consistently to just right around 200,000 a year. Sadly, I think those numbers are going to increase greatly.
And I think it's going to be. I mean, it's going to be a financial disaster for companies that are built around selling THC products from hemp. I just think that goes away entirely unless that there is some carve out that Congress comes up with before November.
I'll add a couple of specifics too. So, because all of these hemp products will essentially become marijuana that's federally illegal, the ones that aren't under zero point 0.4 milligrams per container, they either, of course, would have to shift to other products, shut down completely, or operate as a federally illegal product. And of course, all of our existing adult use cannabis states, and until a couple of weeks ago, medical cannabis states were also federally illegal. They've existed, but there are a ton of challenges that exist because of that. That includes things like the inability to find banking because it's much more expensive for banking. And a lot of the cannabis industry is banked now, but they tend to be charged much higher fees and not get loans. They're only able to use the bank kind of to store their money, not to get loans. Also, credit card companies don't allow cannabis transactions. Right now, hemp can be charged on a credit card. Employees in the cannabis industry can be, if they're not U.S. citizens, they can be deemed permanently inadmissible if they're selling cannabis. So there are a ton of consequences short of a federal crackdown. And there's the issue that since hemp has been federally legal, it's been sold at stores that aren't standalone cannabis stores. So bars, health food stores, and all of those places. The idea that and it's been interstate, which has also not been possible with cannabis. So, even if some states choose to continue to allow this when it's federally illegal, we would need a dramatic restructuring of how it operates, or you'd need a lot of these entities that right now aren't willing to break federal law and sell cannabis itself to decide that they're willing to.
Mm-hmm. What might Congress or the Trump administration do over the next 6 months to alter or reverse course of the federal hemp ban that goes into effect November 12th, if anything?
I guess I'll take that. Well, I mean, I know that the administration is pushing for to fix the hemp ban around the edges to allow a little bit more THC to bring in full spectrum products. It feels like Howard Kessler, who is the guy in the administration who's been pushing for this and owns a company that sells CBD and full spectrum products, has a number that his products fall under. It is still a low number. It is not an intoxicating product, from what I understand, and so they may push to get Congress to change that limit just slightly. I do not see the Trump administration pushing beyond that. I think it's this administration is obviously difficult to gauge going forward, and it often feels like the last person in the president's ear, or the person that's writing the biggest check to his PAC, can get what they want. And while the administration feels like it speaks with one voice, it feels more from the outside like that it's very factional within the administration, and so you're never clear on who comes out on top of those policy decisions. So without making any actual predictions, which I'm sure will make me look foolish at some point, I don't see this administration pushing to get to anything that looks like adult use intoxicating cannabis. And again, that could change based on politics or political donations or, whoever gets the upper hand in the industry. And I wish I had a more rational sort of path forward that I thought they would take. But I think we're all operating under an administration that is a little bit all over the place. But there hasn't been really a lot of indication that they have a real taste for moving adult use forward.
Yeah. One of the questions someone asked, do you see lobbying from alcohol or state regulated cannabis industries as having an impact on this ban? Or
I guess I'll take that again. I would say there's lobbying from the alcohol industry. I think that the interesting place to look at that is going to be around beverages, right? Beverages is sort of its own it's its own category in some ways, because if you have low THC beverages, and when I say low THC in beverage, I'm talking about intoxicating, but at a low level. So let's say somewhere between 2 and 5 milligrams per container. Um, Liquids are sort of self-regulating, right? You can't, you could eat 45 gummies, but you can't drink 45 cannabis drinks, right? And so there's an argument that beverages should be different. And what we're seeing from the alcohol industry is the distillers are largely against allowing THC beverages, and the distributors are largely in favor of allowing THC beverages. And you can imagine what their different business interests are. And so that's sort of the interesting case, right? That is the one thing that Congress may potentially break off and create, a different set of rules for beverage. I don't expect that to happen, but I know that there's a lot of like not cannabis money and not hemp money going into that, especially from the alcohol distributors, and so that is possible. We've seen the rise of adult use cannabis, we've seen a concurrent drop in alcohol use around the country, and it's tempting to equate those and say folks are switching over from alcohol to cannabinoids, and that may well be true, but it's still conjecture at this point. It may just be a healthier lifestyle overall that drives people away from alcohol. But the beverages is where we sort of start to bring in, lobbying forces that are outside of this realm and have, real long-term relationships and the money to make things happen.
So, Ken, in the next 6 months, I guess Adam or Karen or Kevin, do you see that there's going to be enough effort to be able to change this? And then someone just asked to clarify that they're hearing it that hemp will be considered marijuana on November 12th.
Yeah, absent a change to the federal law, that will be the case. Trump is lobbying hard. He has two staff members that are lobbying. There is a bill that's, as Adam mentioned, going to be introduced soon by Representative Andy Barr out of Kentucky. But I don't think it'll, at the federal level, go back to where it was a year ago. As I think Adam alluded to, you might see a change in the amount of milligrams of THC per container that are allowed, but it's unlikely that the synthetics will be highly unlikely that the synthetics will be allowed. It's highly unlikely that it'll be like 100 milligrams per package or even 50 per package, I would guess. There's, going to be a limit probably on the milligrams per container that's far lower than it was. And it's possible that could change before November. I don't know what the odds are. It could either be a standalone bill, or last year it was part of the reopening of the government and the appropriation bill. So there could be other vehicles that it's put into by then as well.
The whole thing is gonna put states in an interesting position. You have states like Texas and a number of states. Tennessee has regulated hemp-derived cannabinoids, and even if the hemp ban goes into effect, marijuana, state-regulated marijuana is not going to be affected by this. And what has been interesting politically is that you have a bunch of states in which they've regulated THC, from hemp, but if you use the word marijuana or cannabis, they don't want to talk about that. That's a blue state thing, right? And so these states are going to be forced with the question of, do they set up essentially, adult use marijuana regulatory systems through which cannabinoids can flow, or are they going to go back to a full ban, or are some states going to attempt to regulate this anyway, despite the ban? I don't know if there are any states that will step out and do that, but any of those states could start a state-regulated marijuana program, right, which would be unaffected by the hemp ban, and afford access to cannabinoids to their citizens. But it'll be interesting to see if any of those mostly red states decide, that marijuana is something that they can regulate, even if hemp cannabinoids were something they were, okay with regulating last year. I wish we could give more. I always, as I talk about this, I always wish we could give more solid and assured answers to where this is all going to go. And I know it's probably frustrating to come and you sit and you listen to people who know it, who are watching this very closely, and we spend a lot of time saying we're not sure of the direction that this will go. I mean, we have some ideas on what won't happen, but it's been I think it reflects the fact that it's been a really difficult time for folks in this industry to try to plan out a business and figure out if they're going to be operating and how they might be able to operate and in which states they might be able to operate. And I think everything is very chaotic right now. And you've got folks lobbying on all sides of this. And again, the thing that I feel most sure about is that we're not going to see, and as Karen pointed out, we're not going to see a reversal of this ban. I don't think we're going to see a broad opening to intoxicating products. And beverages may be a different story. But I think the changes from here are going to be around the edges, and that this ban is going to likely go into effect in some form relatively close to what it looks like now. And states are going to have some decisions to make, and businesses who have relied on selling intoxicating hemp products are going to have a problem.
Yeah, interesting question. I didn't think about it before, but someone just said, how will this impact cannabis seed sellers?
Yeah, so under the bill, the law, I should say, that would take effect in November if it's not changed, it excludes from the definition of hemp any viable seeds from a cannabis plant that exceeds a total THC concentration of 0.3%. So seeds would become illegal if they're seeds for higher potency cannabis, which is not the case now. Now seeds are essentially federally legal regardless.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, I'm going to ask, maybe get Adam kind of touched on this, but how are state governments responding to the anticipated implementation of new restriction on hemp-derived products? What are you seeing, or what are you hearing from various states?
First of all, I think that very similar to the way that we saw the hemp industry develop, we're seeing we're seeing 50 different answers, and I will put in the question and answer section a link to some to the Vicente law firm, which recently had a state by state breakdown. And I know so many people are very much interested in that, what's going on in their state. And there are different approaches that every state is looking at or not looking at. In some cases, we're seeing in the Southeast, obviously, where I work, most of the legislative sessions are over or are coming to an end, and did not see a lot of hemp regulatory legislation be able to make it through. I know, for example, South Carolina still has a conference committee where they're trying to work out the differences between a House and a Senate version on how to move forward with hemp. But, we look at states like North Carolina and Florida that have incredibly robust hemp industries. Florida, it's everywhere. It's in gas stations, it's in vape shops, it's in health stores. And obviously other members of the webinar talked about this. Some have been very good actors and have been moving forward ethically. There are some bad actors out there. But I think something that needs to be mentioned is the fact that if nothing changes before November 12th, interstate commerce of these products are going to be severely impacted. So we look at a multi-billion-dollar a year industry out of Florida, for example. And I've heard numbers that go as high as $7 billion in Florida alone. But those products aren't being created in Florida. A lot of them are being created in states like Virginia and North Carolina specifically, which has a huge hemp market. So how interstate commerce moves is going to be a huge issue. And some states have trigger laws, so that when new federal regulations come in, their state laws automatically reflect that. In fact, I was speaking this morning with a lobbyist in Louisiana And we have a very we have a very robust drink market in Louisiana, and recognizing that the fact that that industry will effectively go away on November 12th. And that's going to have wide-ranging impacts, not just in Louisiana, but in all sorts of states where we've seen, particularly in the hospitality industry, in states that allow these products, particularly the beverages, to be sold in bar rooms, that have been very effective at making sure that their facilities are 21 and over, in a controlled environment, making sure that servers are properly trained the way that they do with alcohol. But we've seen the market move away from alcohol and in some cases to these products. And there's a lot of concern as to whether or not those consumers will go back to alcohol. There's a lot of concern that the consumers, will they participate in a medical or an adult use cannabis marketplace? Many consumers and a lot of industry studies have looked at the fact that a lot of their consumers are not interested in quote unquote traditional marijuana products, or going into a dispensary or going through the process of becoming a medical cannabis patient. But that as soon as they saw it at their local store or liquor store or what have you, they became much more comfortable with that. So there's every state is going to have to take their own individual approach to this. But and Karen hit on this earlier, of what does the IRS tax code in 280E, the how does that affect a company like a bar room? Do they want to have to start dealing with 280E consequences?
Kevin, do you see? I was going to just do you see any states that you think may decide to ignore the ban and continue to regulate this stuff, or do you think it'll be a total turnaround from all the states?
I think some states like North Carolina and Florida, in particular, I think are going to be hard pressed to adopt the ban. Particularly, North Carolina doesn't even have currently a medical cannabis program. And so you have a lot of consumers who have acclimated to them relatively unfettered access to these products for a long time. There could be real political blowback in those states if a product they like gets taken away suddenly. In Florida, I think once again there is the question of how do you kill a just a $5 to $7 billion industry? We saw in Texas last year in their legislative session the blowback on politicians who were trying to take away access to these hemp products. And it's kind of that different. You mentioned that dichotomy earlier of adult use cannabis is a blue state thing or a purple state thing. But access to these hemp products has very much been a very red state thing. And I think politicians need to tread lightly as they move to possibly remove those products from consumers' grasp.
I'll add just one thing. In Ohio, it was the state that most swiftly after the federal hemp ban acted to essentially do the same thing, but even quicker. They banned all of the intoxicating hemp products immediately. The legislature passed an omnibus bill that included that. The governor line item vetoed the part of the bill that allowed beverages to continue for a year. So they completely banned them, but there was actually a successful court challenge that was based, I think, on interstate commerce, that they weren't allowing interstate hemp when they had intrastate cannabis. That has delayed that ban from taking effect. So, we have seen that in that one state. And just to expand on the Schedule 1 and 280E point that you made, so cannabis businesses under 280E of the federal law tax code cannot deduct their typical business expenses from their taxes. They have very, very, very high effective tax rates. If hemp becomes cannabis, the parts of hemp that become cannabis, that would apply too, if cannabis remains Schedule 1. But in a couple of months, there are going to be hearings on whether cannabis as a whole, not just state legal medical cannabis, is rescheduled to Schedule 3. Anything that's Schedule 3 or a higher number, less restrictively scheduled, 280E doesn't apply to. So it's an open question, depending on federal rescheduling, if that would apply to hemp.
Yeah, and I know, Kevin, it's interesting you talk about Louisiana. Minnesota is very similar in the THC drink. The number of producers and distributors within this market significant, and definitely the landscape there. The shifting of that makes a big difference. Um, Adam, someone asked that you mentioning the edges of the bill, and they're just wondering if you can elaborate on that.
I mean, I just think it's about you know, 4 milligram or 0.4 milligrams, right, or 4 milligrams per package, may become 6 milligrams per package, may become something that's slightly higher, you know, but still below intoxicating levels, and you know, something that would sweep in full spectrum products, or at least, you know, nominally full spectrum products. So, you know, when I talk about around the edges, I do not think, and again, you know, my record of betting on what this Congress will do is, you know, mixed. So, so take this, you know, don't take this to the bank or anything. But I strongly think that if they change this at all, it's going to be in ways that will let in some of the other non-intoxicating products, but will not expand to the point where we're back to allowing intoxicating hemp products under federal law.
Thank you. Someone asked if we they're from their perspective that we just keep talking that this is the next 6 months, November 12th, that's just happening. Um, and just, but I think we touched on the things that potentially could affect the change of this. It's just the probability of it being able to be accomplished within 6 months, I think, is the challenge, correct?
Oh yeah, I mean, I would say that's right. I think what Kevin touched on, there will be pushback in a lot of these states, right? In a lot of these red states. And so what you may see is coming into the next Congress, whoever controls the chambers, you may see members of Congress who feel under political pressure to go back into this issue, right? To try to, you know, to try to fix stuff. I mean, it would be helpful for those states in Florida, you know, that's looking at a $7 billion, $5 to $7 billion industry. It'd be helpful if it happened fast. But it just feels unlikely, given everything in the midterms, that you know, anything major is going to change on this before, you know, during this Congress before November. You know, not impossible that, you know, that we see something in the lame duck. But I really feel like if we're going to address this as intoxicating cannabinoids and setting some federal framework, that it's likely to happen later. I just don't see how they're going to get it done now. Again, you know, beverages is a possibility, and you know, someone may decide heading into the midterms. I mean, there may be some change in thought heading into the midterms that they want to get this done if there's enough political pressure. But I just feel like there is not the impetus to open up intoxicating cannabinoids by this Congress after passing the ban.
Yeah, yeah. There's another individual just why do you keep talking as those we're still Schedule 1 when it's in progress of being changed to Schedule 3. I think all of us have been in this industry long enough, you know, until it's done, it ain't done. I mean, there's a lot of great momentum in there, but I think it was about 2 years ago, maybe 18 months ago, when I thought Safe Banking Act seemed like a slam dunk and great momentum, and then all of a sudden it didn't happen. And that one seems like a simple no brainer. Just for the listeners, we'll be sending out a webinar we're going to be doing with the law firm Denton. They're on the registration, the DEA. It's really a Q&A about both the medical and adult registration and what that looks like in Schedule 1 versus Schedule 3. So Just doing a little plug there for that. It's a very interesting subject, just as much as this is as well. Um, so I just one second. Um,
I mean,
are,
I can
go
mention on the
jump.
rescheduling. I can mention on the
Yeah.
rescheduling. I mean, it's important to know that right now, unlike normal rescheduling of substances, this one came with a dependent clause on whose hands it was in. Right. Normally, the schedule is used to delineate the substance itself. This was, going to split the substance up even further and say, well, it's Schedule 3 if it's in the hands of of a state medical licensee, potentially only a state medical licensee with a DEA registration. We will see. The question of changing the whole thing to Schedule 3 um, does not still make it federally legal for non-medical use. So let's be clear about that. And so, you can be arrested for selling Tylenol 3 if you're not a DEA registrant, for example, right? And so it doesn't make it federally legal. Whether the hearing will result in them more broadly turning the whole, all cannabis itself and natural extraction to Schedule 3 is yet to be seen. That would certainly change the calculus for 280E for adult use businesses. And there's also, keep in mind, there's a lawsuit that's been threatened by there's an organization called Project SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, and they along with the drug testing folks, and I think it's like the National Associations of Substance Testers. I forgot the name of their organization. Have threatened a lawsuit, have put in notice that they intend to sue. It's not clear they'll have standing to sue to stop the rescheduling or the partial rescheduling. But our sense is that they are looking for a co-plaintiff that will get them standing. And if they do get standing, I've heard opinions both ways on whether the rescheduling, the way they set it up as a response to the UN treaties, will stand up in court or won't stand up in court. Those are great questions to ask Dentons. Kind of amazing that you're going to get a chance to do a webinar with Dentons. They're the largest law firm in the world, and they have a big cannabis division, which is run by Eric Berlin, who's brilliant, and has been doing this for years. So all you people listening, if you have any interest in this, you should definitely sit in on that webinar.
Thank you. The question is, what about a transition period for small businesses to pivot to compliant categories? I guess I really haven't heard anything of that.
Doubtful. Karen, you have a thought on that? I mean, I would be.
That's what the year delay was. I mean, I think that was the thinking behind for years. That would give folks a year, to transition or close down. It's possible people are pushing to push it out as well as to change it around the edges, as Adam said. So far, those haven't succeeded. And I might have mentioned before that Trump included in his rescheduling order when he announced it that he wanted to see this changed, and he posted on Trump's Truth Social saying that he wants Congress to update the laws to preserve access to full spectrum CBD products that people have come to rely on. We must get this done right and fast. So he is lobbying and pushing. Two of his staff members are pushing on this bill. But again, it's not something that will completely allow intoxicating hemp. It won't allow probably any intoxicating hemp. It would just allow more full spectrum CBD products with higher amounts of THC than is in the existing law that takes effect next November.
If I could add one point to that, I would also like to mention that hemp farmers are supposed to be putting their crops in the ground right now to be harvested in the fall. And it is, I'm glad that I'm not a farmer in North Carolina or Tennessee. trying to figure out if their product is going to be a legal product or an illegal product. And specifically, I'm meaning the farmers that were growing for the consumable hemp industry. Industrial hemp was not affected um, by this hemp ban, to the best of my knowledge, in any meaningful way. But there's a lot of farmers that are having to make very hard decisions in a arena that I think this webinar has shown that there's a lot of unknowns. So I just wanted to mention that.
And yet, in the midst of this, Target just added 3 states to the states in which they're selling THC beverages in their stores, which is either some sense that maybe that builds momentum, or some sense that maybe there'll be some change on the beverage side, or maybe they have a ton of product that they need to get rid of before the ban hits. Unclear what drives that, but there are still people acting with some hope on the beverage side that something will change. Again, that may be the one category that has a chance to be broken off from the rest of the cannabinoids.
Yeah, again, ever sand shifting world we live in. It's just amazing. Are there other state or policy issues or opportunities that the listeners should be aware of? I know you kind of touched on about the Massachusetts ballot campaign that's going on.
Right.
Are there any others, Adam?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen pushback against adult use. Karen can talk to the bill that we, sort of helped moderate in Ohio, that added penalties and reduced rights. I will say that there's a bill in Louisiana that is going to the governor's desk that will increase penalties for cannabis offenses within, I think it's 2,500 feet of a school, including a college. And including if you are on your own property within that area, and so that seems to be something to watch. We're seeing again the same organization, Project Sam, in state legislatures all over the country, and it's not just them, but they are the sort of stalking horse for the neo-prohibitionist movement, as I call them. And while they keep saying, "Oh, we don't want to go back to arresting people," they keep pushing stuff that would go back to arresting people. And so there is a pushback against this, and it's also interesting to note that in the Gallup poll 2 years ago, something over 60% of Republicans favored legalization. In the Gallup poll this year, it was slightly under 50% of Republicans, and there has been a concerted push in sort of right-wing media against the idea of cannabis legalization, and so there is sort of a growing and better and better funded effort to push back on this. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. It's why I'm really interested in the kids issue, because the numbers that we're getting in show that at the very worst, legalization does not increase youth use, but all indications are that the more we put it behind the counter, the less access there is for kids, the less use there is by kids, and so be ready to stand up against that, because historically in this country, it's been women and mothers, and very specifically white mothers, who have driven a lot of drug and alcohol policy. Right, it was the Women's Christian Temperance Union that pushed us in alcohol prohibition. It was Women for the Repeal of the Prohibition Law that pulled us out of prohibition. It was organized evangelical moms who pushed the Reagan administration into the Just Say No era, which sort of led inexorably to this massive increase in arrests and real enforcement of prohibition around the country. And so when you hear the today's prohibitionists talk, they will talk incessantly both about kids and about how the legal industry, that legal cannabis businesses, big marijuana, wants to addict your children, and that is their goal, and demonizing that. And so that is something to watch for, is as we sort of stall. I mean, we just saw the Democratic governor of Virginia veto veto regulated adult use sales, which is something she campaigned on passing. Um, and so, Pennsylvania's taken a bit. They're close to adult use legalization, but they're not there yet. So we've seen this sort of stall, in progress, and we're starting to see a pushback. So that's something to keep in mind. Interestingly, the Massachusetts ballot initiative, which would end adult use sales. There is the same ballot initiative was introduced in Massachusetts, and it looks like that may be heading to the ballot next June. But the same initiative was also filed in Arizona, and they decided not to move forward. And the guy who was the head of their ballot committee in Arizona told the press 2 weeks ago when they announced that they were not going to pursue this. He said, when I got involved in this, I thought that my understanding was the adult use industry was targeting young people. He said, and I found out that is not the case. And so I thought that was very interesting. I don't know if he was being honest about that, or if his funders just walked away and that was what he said. But I think the pushback is something to keep an eye on. And obviously this Schedule 3. If the final order stands, what it really does, if you read it, is it makes cannabis in the hands of DEA registrants federally legal, and that should open up interstate commerce in between registrants in various states. In most states that have medical programs, there are state laws against import and export, and so you will either see, or you will see both, a legislative push to change those laws to line up with the new federal policy, or you're likely to see a federal lawsuit brought against multiple states under the Dormant Commerce Clause, saying that there is no cannabis exception to the Dormant Commerce Clause in the Constitution, right? New York can't say, oh, you can buy Tylenol 3, but only if it's made in New York, right? That's not a thing. And so we're likely to see federal litigation to open up interstate commerce. And also you have states that do not have medical programs, that if the final order stands and this is rescheduled for medical, are going to feel under some pressure to open up medical programs. And in fact, South Carolina had a law that they passed in 1980, which said the minute the federal government changes policy on this, we will have a medical program, and they obviously don't yet. But some of those states may decide that rather than license an entire production industry in, say, Wyoming or Indiana, that they will pass medical programs that depend on interstate commerce. And so I think that the commerce issue is a really interesting issue to watch. It would be limited to medical, but it would be very important that it would be the first time, in 100 years, where cannabis of any kind that was not called hemp could travel between states. And so that might be something with reverberations that echoed out right through the industry.
Interesting. Well, we are near the end, and again, I do appreciate everyone, Adam, Karen, and Kevin. I do appreciate your time of doing a webinar, and hopefully people got something out of this. Yeah, unfortunately it's a constant battle. If it sounds negative, that's not our intent, but unfortunately at times we have headwinds that we're working against to try to make things move in the right direction. So, but again, I appreciate all of your time and everything that you guys are doing. And then I look forward to our next webinar.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks. All right. Bye-bye.